folk rock. I think if you follow me and listen to my terrible singing, you're probably a folk rock fan, because if you're listening to me and I'm a terrible author turned terrible singer, you probably like folk rock. But say you don't like folk rock and you're not listening to Steel Ice Band and Sandy Denny on your days off, you probably haven't heard of Thomas the Rhymer. Thomas the Rhymer is a ballad. It's usually about 8 minutes long when performed. A lot of people have performed it. Pamela Morgan probably does the best one, followed of course by Maddie Pryor. But Thomas the Rhymer is based loosely on the life of Thomas of Earlston, who was a lord who we know existed. He is an historical figure. And funnily enough, a branch of his family went to Russia, and there was a Thomas Learmont, a Russian poet, who was the namesake of his 12th century Scottish ancestor, Thomas Learmont of Earlston. And the Thomas the Rhymer story goes that Thomas, also called True Thomas because he was a prophet and a holy man, Christian, obviously. He was obviously Christian. He's much like Nostradamus, except Nostradamus is Jewish. But True Thomas is out riding his horse. He stops by the river bank. He meets the Queen of Fairies. The Queen of Fairies and he have an affair. It's all very chaste in the ballad. They kiss, and kissing is enough for them to be legally married. And he goes off into fairyland with her for 7 years to be her husband, during which time he apparently can't speak because he is human. And even though he can't speak, he returns home with the gift of prophecy. The majority of the Thomas the Rhymer ballad has to do with the voyage, which in Thomas the Rhymer is entirely the fairy queen and Thomas on her horse, and they travel through the path to heaven, the path to hell, and the path to fairyland. Even if you've never heard of Thomas the Rhymer and have not heard Pamela Morgan's version, which you should if you're on YouTube right now, Google Thomas the Rhymer, YouTube Thomas the Rhymer. Listen to that one, listen to the Steel Ice Band one. I think Damn the Bard has a new one out. No, I'm thinking of somebody else. It's not Damn the Bard. Somebody has a new one out. It's very interesting, but you probably have heard of Tamlin. Tamlin is very much the same story. Tamlin, Tam being Gaelic for Thomas, goes a-hunting. He falls off his horse. He is saved from certain death by the fairy queen. He becomes the fairy queen's lover. He lives in the forest as a huntsman of the fairy queen. It's all very idyllic. And then Janet comes along and Thomas says, or Tam in this case says, well, I want to screw Janet. So he screws Janet. Some versions justify this, that Thomas and Janet are actually childhood friends and they see each other in the woods and are so attracted to each other they just screw on the spot. But anyway, Thomas and Janet have sex. Janet gets pregnant. She says, oh, I can't do this. You're, the fairy queen's lover. And he goes to this complicated spiel about Halloween as like a divorce applicable day. In Celtic legal terms, he can get divorced on Halloween because it's the end of the year. And Janet just has to kidnap him because he's riding in a knightly procession of, the men-at-arms, and Janet has to kidnap him and take him forcibly as a bride back to, human civilization. It might be one of the most ridiculous stories if you think about it logically, because supposedly this heavily pregnant woman is kidnapping her husband, who is armed and sitting on a horse in the middle of a parade filled with armed men, and dragging him shotgun wedding to an abbey, because on Halloween he's not legally married to his current wife. I mean, if you think about Tamlin logically, it is nonsense. From our modern point of view, I imagine these stories, are both originally from, pagan Ireland, pagan Wales, long before the birth of Christ. This probably made a lot more sense if you were a Welsh farmer back before Rome invaded. This probably made perfect sense. It doesn't make any sense to us. That doesn't harm the fact, or doesn't stop the story from being one of the most popular fairy tales on Earth. There's Sleeping Beauty, Snow White, Tamlin, and Iron Hans. Those might be the most popular fairy tales you're ever going to see. But my point is that Tamlin is batshit, and it's much more popular than Thomas the Rhymer. But it's pretty much the same story from different perspectives. A character named Thomas, or Tam in Tamlin's case, has a dalliance with the fairy queen, a pagan goddess or an elf woman of some kind. And Thomas the Rhymer, her divinity is proven by Thomas thinking she's the Virgin Mary. And being informed that no, she's not the Virgin Mary, she's the Queen of Fairy, which really alludes to a type of pagan survival that you can't really deny in that. But, it's the same story. Thomas, the Thomas character, has the dalliance with the elf woman, stays with her for several years, and returns to Scotland. Thomas the Rhymer, the historical figure, certainly existed. Prophecies attributed to Thomas the Rhymer certainly exist. Famously, Thomas the Rhymer predicted the Stuart monarchy controlling England. Famously, Thomas the Rhymer predicted, I think it was the murder of Alexander III. So people have, at least for 900 years, actually believed that Thomas the Rhymer was a real deal psychic. In all likelihood, the historical Thomas the Rhymer probably practiced some form of surviving paganism. He probably, considering that it's the borders, the Vikings were very active in this era, he was probably of Norse descent himself. We're only, a generation, 2 or 3 generations removed from Viking kingdoms of Northumbria. He was probably practicing some kind of skaldic, divinative, something. He probably was. He probably was pagan. That probably has nothing to do with the myth at all. I don't think that the Thomas the Rhymer Tamlin myth is Norse. Elves are Norse. The elf-fairy dynamic in Scotland is interchangeable. Fairies are elves, elves are fairies. Elf is the Norse word, fairy is the Irish word. Scotland, caught in the middle, uses both of them. But I don't think the Thomas the Rhymer story has anything to do with the historical Thomas the Rhymer, and it probably doesn't have anything to do with the Norse concept of elves. I think is entirely a Celtic, probably Brittonic myth about a hero who was married to several different women. He probably had multiple lovers. This is probably a somewhat Holly King, Oak King type thing, where the hero, who obviously wasn't named Thomas to begin with, is a druid, a bard, a bardic hero, somebody like Ogmar Lu in Ireland, who is a warrior bard. He sleeps with the sovereignty goddess, is granted kingship, elopes with another goddess, loses kingship, is reincarnated and reborn. It's very Celtic. You've got the Wine of Eden in there. You've got the sovereignty goddess Meb Guinevere thing going on. It's entirely Celtic. I think we can safely say the Tamlin myth is entirely Celtic. But I think it's also the same thing as the Thomas the Rhymer myth. I think the Thomas the Rhymer portion is the beginning of the myth. Thomas, we'll just call the hero Thomas, it's easier that way. Thomas has the encounter with the sovereignty goddess. They have sex, they consummate the marriage. He is married to the sovereignty goddess. He is king. There's a voyage there. The horse journey in Thomas the Rhymer is certainly the leftovers of a Celtic voyage tale. They probably voyage around the universe. They return. Thomas takes the second wife. He dies, is reincarnated. We have the Wooing of Eden part where he's reincarnated into the husband of the wife's reincarnation. Cue happily ever after fairy tale ending, which we get at the end of Tamlin. I'm not completely pulling this out of my ass. The version of Tamlin we have currently is 16th century or 17th century. People in the 16th century knew of Tamlin. People in the 16th century thought that Tamlin was written in the 14th century. I imagine people in the 14th century probably thought Tamlin was written earlier. It just goes back like that. We know that the early version of Tamlin was much longer. The Protestant reformer claims that Tamlin was a very long, devilish romance, which was only known to the Scots. So the long Tamlin, which we know did exist 500 years ago, most likely is the combination of both stories, and that the local Thomas the Rhymer tradition is separate and connects Thomas the Rhymer, the historical figure, to the previously mythological character. I'm certainly convinced of this. If you check my Medium page, I have tried 4 different times to write a version of what I think the original myth was, and 4 times I've been left unsatisfied. Honestly, at this point, I could publish a book of nothing but Tamlin rewrites. I've written like 9 of them. Connlyn Sinclair presents 9 stupid Tamlins. That might be my next book. But yeah, I think we're never going to know, barring the 15th century Tamlin being found in a monastery someplace in the Hebrides. We got nothing. But it's fascinating. And I think that Tamlin, Thomas the Rhymer, I think it's there. I think the evidence is there. I think a lot of people think I'm stupid. Just read the stupid Diane Wynne Jones version, Fire and Hemlock. She wrote Howl's Moving Castle. She wrote the definitive prose Tamlin. I'm not anywhere near as talented as her. Go read it.